Great, thanks Matt, and good morning everyone. Hello, I'm Matt Wesson. I'm the Managing Director of Robert Half in the UK. Welcome to our third and final forum celebrating women in business. Tuesday was career reflections, Wednesday was the Great Leveller, and the third and final one is the future of work. So we're really excited to have everyone this morning. 2020 has been a year of COVID-19, but it's also marked the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, and CIS Robert Half sponsoring the Women in Business Expo for its second year. That was yesterday and today. As a business that is founded on the principle of putting ethics first, it is important that we recognise this pivotal time and champion a great event that does so much to support women in the workplace. Today, we're delighted to be hosting a fantastic, inspiring panel of women to discuss the future of work. I want to say a big thank you to all of them for giving their time to join us, and we're really excited and looking forward to hearing their thoughts this morning. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Vicki Austin, who is our Senior HR Manager for Robert Half UK and Middle East, and she's going to be hosting the event. So I'll pass over to you, Vicki.
Thanks, Matt, and welcome everybody to this great session. Really excited to be talking about this topic today, the future of work. After what has been a game-changing year, this looks like it's going to be a great discussion. So thank you for joining the call today. We have 5 great panelists who are going to share their thoughts and insights to our questions and provide some really inspiring stories. As Matt has said, today is our third and final Great Women in Business breakfast meeting. And again, today's session will be recorded alongside the previous 2 sessions, which will then be available to listen to on our website. I've personally listened into both of those previous sessions, and the conversations have been extremely engaging and inspirational. We're ably supported today by Matt Robinson, who will be our producer for the session. And Matt will help us to run our poll and will assist with our audience Q&A. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. So if you pop your questions in there, and we will have time at the end of the discussion today to answer your questions. So first of all, I wanted to hand over to our panelists for today's session to introduce themselves, as I think they will introduce themselves much better than I could ever do. So can I ask our first panelist, Sharon, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here this morning. Thank you for the introduction, Vicki. My name's Sharon Kindleysides, and I'm currently the CEO of the Diocese of Bath and Wells. But during COVID, I actually made a massive career change. Previously, I've been in the tech sector for probably 30 years. And so one of the advantages of having a lot of time to think over the COVID lockdown was really resulted in this change of direction. I would also say I'm a single mum, and I had a 13-year-old boy at home through lockdown. So I have some quite nice memories, but some very painful ones as well. And as I said, looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Emma, if we can hand over to you.
Yeah, hi, thanks Vicki. Hello everybody, really pleased to be here. I'm Emma Pearson, and I'm currently the Chief Executive of a really wonderful organisation called Achieve Together. And for those of you who don't know us, I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at our website to get a handle on what we do. But we support people with learning disabilities and autism across England and Wales. We support around 2,100 vulnerable people. And I joined Achieve Together in January, approximately 4 weeks before we started talking about going down into lockdown. And it was my first role in social care, so quite an introduction. I guess my career has built up through always being at the interface of being of public and private sector. I really enjoy that challenge of how do we really deliver public services brilliantly from within the private sector. So yeah, also had a pretty challenging COVID period, and happy to talk about that a little bit more later on if it's of interest.
Absolutely, Emma. Zara, can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Zara. I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called Gapsquare, and we use tech and data to help businesses create a fairer future of work. We've set up the company about 5 years ago when the World Economic Forum said it will be 217 years for the gender pay gap to close. And we thought, surely there's a better way to do things. At the same time, the World Economic Forum was saying by 2030, we will all be in self-driving cars, we'll be waving people off to Mars, we'll be having all of this amazing technology that will be facilitating our lives at home and at work, but somehow we'll still be 200 years away from achieving pay equity. So what we do is we use tech and data to help businesses close the pay gap faster. And I'm really excited about the conversation this morning.
Thank you. Anne, can I pass to you?
Morning, hopefully you can hear me because my new laptop now is showing me complete snow, which is what happens when you're in your kitchen. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Godfrey, I'm Chief Executive Officer of GS1 UK, which is a membership organisation which helps the supply chain. And that could be retailers, marketplaces, or the NHS. I was interviewed for that role just as we shut down for COVID, and I've been in post now for 8 weeks. So I am living the new normal, which is I'm being inducted and becoming the leader of an organisation, none of whom have actually met me. And I think that might be the new normal for quite some time for everybody. So how you actually manage that is one of the things I'd really be interested in hearing from everybody else today.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, Anne. That two of you have sort of gone into jobs so close to the start of this lockdown period. And last, definitely not least, Holly, could I pass to you, please?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. So my name is Holly Rosetti. I'm currently the Director of EMEA Communications for ADOBE, so a large software company. And my background is communications, kind of from the outset of my career. And I've moved over from the US to London about 16 years ago. So I'm London-based, and I'm happy that we're able to take advantage of some of London right now. So hopefully we can continue to have a good environment to get out and enjoy the city and the urban lifestyle. But yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you. So to get us warmed up this morning and to get the audience involved a little bit, we would like to start off with a poll. So the poll today and the question is, has the perception of women in the workplace changed since COVID-19? And 4 possible answers. 1, yes, women are sought after leaders now. 2, it's starting to, but there's more hope for women in business now. Not really, COVID-19 will pass and gender equality will need more attention. And no, there's been no impact on the perception of women in the workplace. So if you could cast your votes, and we'll give it a couple of minutes.
Yeah, Vicky, we've nearly got all votes in, so I'll just
Great.
leave it running for about another 10, 12 seconds.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I think we've got most votes in. I'm going to end the poll now. And you should be able to see the results now, Vicky. There they are.
Wow. So clear winner there. Clear highest score is that the perception of women hasn't really changed, that COVID-19 will go, we hope sooner than later, but gender equality sadly will need more attention. And in fact, you know, the second highest score there, no impact on the perception of women in the workplace at all. I'd like to just ask the panelists, is anyone surprised by those results, or is that what you were expecting to see?
I think sadly it's what I was expecting to see. I've got a bit of a head up so that I get to answer this question later, but I think that is how people feel at the moment.
I was pretty surprised, actually. I think maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but it feels to me that female leadership is really sought after, and maybe it depends on the sector that you come from and the place in which you work. So I imagine if you're in technology or construction or some of the more, male-dominated industries, that might well be the case.
Yes, perception will be different. Well, actually, that does lead us perfectly into our first question. So question one, and Sharon, yes, I would love you to continue that thought. Do you think the perception of women in the workplace has changed since COVID-19?
Yeah, thanks, Vicki. I think, as I alluded to, and bearing in mind Emma's point as well, I have come from a background of technology, and I've moved to the Church of England, which, although it is a charity, is still quite male-dominated. And I think one of the things I've noticed is that stereotypes still seem to be in place and seem to be reinforced. I would say the notable exception to that, and sadly I've forgotten the lady's name, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who without a doubt has come out of this head and shoulders above all other world leaders. She's really shown amazing leadership and pragmatism and passion. So she can only be lauded. But I feel in a normal day-to-day workplace, if anything, things have got slightly worse. So I did a little bit of research, and okay, you can't believe everything you read on the internet, but according to Sky News, 35% of women have received some sort of sexist workplace demand for when they're on Zoom calls, either suggesting they wear more makeup, that they dress their hair, or even that they dress more provocatively. And this is just insane. I mean, yes, nobody likes staring at their pictures every day, and the bags under my eyes have certainly got bigger during lockdown. But if a gentleman said to me, go and put some makeup on, I'm sorry, I would have to virtually slap him. But apparently 35% of women have experienced that. And that's really not acceptable. There were also some studies done about what actually happens at home. And according to a UCL and the Institute of Fiscal Studies report, in heterosexual couples, for every hour of uninterrupted work the mother in the family receives or is able to do, the father in the family manages to do 3 hours. So the stereotypical roles still seem to be reinforced at home. And apparently the only situation where, again, heterosexual couples, the man and the lady did the same amount of chores was if the lady was still in paid employment and the man had been furloughed. At that point, they did the same number of hours, even though the lady was still doing a full-time job. So I think, yes, that's not everybody. And certainly I've got gentlemen colleagues who have more than taken on their fair share of work. You know, they've said, I can't do the morning because I do morning childcare, my wife does afternoon childcare. But I think there's been a lot of assumptions that women will just get on with it and carry on doing it. Hopefully, some of the gentlemen, when they're working from home, may be a bit more aware of what their female colleagues have to put up with and some of the problems they have. But I would also say, especially when we're in this strange situation at the moment of, well, work from home if you can, but go into work if you can't, I think it's a very genuine reason to go into work to have adult company. As I alluded to, I spent lockdown with a 13-year-old boy who only wanted to play Fortnite. Conversation topics are severely limited. I really don't know enough about gaming, and I was desperate to have, you know, just a proper talk even about the weather. So in my new role, I have encouraged people, if they want to actually have adult company and get away from the family, that coming into work is a legitimate reason for doing that for mental well-being. I think what I've also noticed, and this has got positives and negatives, in large meetings, it's obviously often difficult for people who are shy and expanding that ladies to get heard, and it's very difficult to interrupt. And what I've seen on Zoom is, yes, there are conversations where people get talked over, but a good chairman or a good moderator is very good at pulling people into conversation and making sure everyone gets heard. And I was on a board meeting yesterday with the chairman, can get through very quickly by muting everybody and then just unmuting you in turn. And that worked brilliantly, but it's not the same as being able to interject. And I think there's some sort of a feeling, oh, I don't want to put it in chat, I don't want to raise my hand. So if you're not an outgoing and a loud person, it's very, very difficult on a Zoom call, especially the big ones, to get yourself heard. So I think we need more awareness of that. And it's the same for sort of the more shy gentlemen or people whose English isn't the first language. There will be people who really struggle on Zoom. and a chairman can't make eye contact with everybody. I mean, we've got 8, 9 people on the screen at the moment. If you're in some of these Zoom calls where it's on 6 pages, even raising your hand physically is very difficult to get seen. And then another really area I want to look into is there seems to be an assumption that everyone's got a lovely working study at home and they can work from home physically. Women on average get paid less. How many people actually have 2 spare rooms in their house if they're a couple, or for younger people who are in shared houses? So there seems to be a lot of a perception from people of a certain income bracket that you've got this lovely study and stable broadband, but again, it's women who might be struggling in this end. So I think there's an awful lot of things that the pandemic has probably brought into focus, and that's a good thing. I think a lot of organisations are keen to change or have realised they have to change. I think the challenge is going to be, how do we make sure that that is in a way that is very inclusive, that addresses the needs of women, that addresses the needs of all groups. And really, I think for us as leaders, what we have to be very aware of, and I try to do this myself, but I know I fail, is when you're on a Zoom call, make sure everyone feels involved. And also for the people that really don't like video calling, you know, pick up a normal traditional phone to them. There's nothing more terrifying if you're sitting at the desk and the video thing goes off and you're just really not ready for it. So sometimes be a bit aware that not everybody wants to have a video call and rely on the old-fashioned methods. So I think pandemic has slightly not really changed the perception of women in the workplace, but I think it's made us more aware that there's things we can do. Thanks, Vicki.
That's great. Some great insights, Sharon. Emma, you were a little surprised perhaps by the score of the polls, so I'm just going to ask you for your comments from your perception.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's not COVID related, actually. To me, it's been coming for a long while, and it probably links into one of the questions that's later on around what leadership traits count today. So I'll kind of pick up some comments on that in what I say. But I do think when I look at the workforce today compared to when I started my career 25 years ago, people are much more likely to feel empowered around shifting their careers, moving organisations, telling leadership that they're not getting it right. Social media has really helped with that and created some transparency. So I think this was coming anyway, and what I think has happened, potentially ramped up a little bit faster during COVID, is that you see organisations, and particularly I look around the sector that I'm in, see organisations needing to really listen to the workforce, listen hard to the workforce, and to find ways of cutting through, in my case, to the front line, to understand what's really going on there. And you can't do that unless you have humility and you know, kind of engagement, employee engagement at the heart of what you do. And I look back to maybe you know, slightly more traditional organisations that I've worked in previously, and whether it's to do with the male leadership or whether it's to do with just a more traditional patriarchal style of leadership, whether that happens to be a man or a woman at the top, those behaviours weren't really there. It was much more top-down, command and control type of organisation. And I think we're just starting in some organisations to see a more middle up, at least. It maybe not front, maybe not bottom up quite yet, but certainly middle up, engaged workforce, and that has to come from a listening and kind of humble style of leadership. And I do think that potentially, you know, that's why women can be sought after at this time. Just generates a slightly different dynamic, and encourages more women into the workplace as well. And we've definitely seen, I've seen that throughout my career as I've moved roles.
Fantastic, thank you, Emma. If we move then to our second question, has COVID-19 or the Black Lives Matter protests prompted you to think differently about your business culture, talent retention, or leadership? And Zara, could I hand over to you to kick off this question, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Vicki. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in kind of two perspectives on this, the perspective of Gapsquare and me as a leader of Gapsquare, but then also we work with businesses around the world to look at their D&I agenda. So I can bring in some insights from that side too. So in January 2020, we were not excelling on progress, but we were on track for gender equality in terms of the agenda was picking up. It was becoming mainstream conversation. More and more businesses were taking it on board. We had in the UK legislation that was making it mandatory for businesses with 250 people or more to report on their gender pay gap on an annual basis, and this would have been the third year of reporting. So it was kind of becoming mainstream and embedded. There was already conversation on ethnicity pay reporting, which meant businesses were starting to prepare for collecting more data around their ethnic diversity within the business and analyzing that data. Of course, the unexpectedness of COVID and the risks associated with that meant that we had to go into lockdown, and then a lot of businesses have unfortunately sidelined this agenda. And the UK government hasn't really helped by putting legislation on gender pay gap reporting on hold, and therefore signaling to a lot of businesses that this is not an important agenda when you are in crisis. So this agenda can be sidelined. Let's put it on hold. You have other things to deal with. More progressive businesses didn't really do that. They continued to publish their numbers because they knew that diversity and inclusion and making sure they support women through career progression and recruit more women within their business is actually building more resilience within their business, and it's going to make them more prepared for crisis and more adaptable and more agile. So they continue to do that, but a large majority of businesses we've seen have sidelined this agenda. Black Lives Matter movement has put a different spin on this, and over the summer we've seen an increasing number of businesses looking into the ethnicity pay reporting and looking into how they can support people of color within their organization. So actually this movement has been good, both in terms of gender and ethnicity, because it has prompted a lot of companies to think more about this regardless of legislation. So it's played out both ways, and regulation hasn't really helped in that it has sidelined the agenda somewhat. We did a research over the month of August, and we interviewed a lot of businesses in the UK, but also in the US, around how they are doing with the diversity and inclusion agenda in light of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter. And it was interesting to see that at the beginning of COVID, a lot of companies have furloughed their staff that were responsible for diversity and inclusion agenda, or have assigned them new responsibilities related to other issues within the company that they saw as more important. So throughout March to kind of May, early June, that was happening, and the diversity and inclusion agenda was kind of taken out even from official roles. And then from June onwards, you can see a lot of those roles reinstated and more as the Black Lives Matter movement was picking up. So from our point of view, we see how a lot of companies that actually work on embedding diversity and inclusion within their business, within their core practices and policies and procedures, have been more resilient through this crisis. They have furloughed less people. They have been able to have open conversations around how they move the business forward. They have prioritized women. They have we did an interesting study with a lot of the businesses, and we asked them how many of them knew if their employees have caring responsibilities. So do you know if your employees have children at home? Because obviously, as we were in lockdown and schools were closed, that was a big issue, having childcare responsibilities. And only 30% of the businesses knew if their employees have caring responsibilities and who those employees are, so they can support them through this time or understand their flexible working needs. So, but those were the more progressive businesses that were ready for this, and they were already collecting this kind of data before. I think this is a time of the crossroads where really picking this agenda up more is going to help a lot of businesses advance into this space. At Gapsquare, we've always been aware of this agenda. Obviously, this is our business. We work on supporting large companies to create more diversity and inclusion through data. So we use data internally to help us achieve the same thing. So we have gender diversity, less ethnic diversity, but it's something we're working on. and we're actively aware of. So yes, I guess that's the kind of not a clear-cut answer. It was the agenda was impacted at the beginning in a negative way, but it's beginning to pick up as a means of resilience and as a means of building a better business fit for the 21st century.
Thank you, Zara. And actually, I'm proud to be part of an organisation that is more progressive and did continue to report our gender pay gap, because we did feel that it was massively important. And personally, I was pretty surprised when that was put on hold, because it did feel like it pushed it much further down the agenda in importance. Holly, would you like to add anything to Zara's thoughts?
Sure. So to kind of reinforce what Zara was talking about companies being very committed to the D&I agenda during COVID, Adobe is certainly one of those companies. And we have some interesting initiatives around sort of, we've achieved global pay parity, but another initiative that looks at opportunity parity. So our employees and multiple employee segments, are they given the opportunity? Are they being considered for promotion? Do they have mobility within the organization? So that goes alongside the global pay parity, which is I think something interesting and quite different that Adobe has pioneered. And then maybe to talk a little bit about the wellness aspect. So Emma, I think you talked about it, and Sharon, you did too. And so this is where we have seen a real acceleration in looking after employees and making sure that the well-being is addressed and taking action in areas. So for example, we have every third Friday off for the remainder of the year. So that's to enable employees to kind of reconnect and take time out. Our research indicated with employees that what we could give them, the most valuable thing we could give them at this time was time back to connect and engage. So that is something that is having a great impact on people and a positive impact. And then maybe just to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter. We have a Black employee network at Adobe, which is quite young, so it's a year old. And during the Black Lives Matter, the social injustice and everything, this network really came to the forefront and had a very, very strong voice across the organization, and was out doing an education campaign to a 22,000 person organization. And it really, I think it prompted a lot of of our teams and our staff to think more about what it means to be a Black employee at Adobe. And it was quite powerful to have this network have a voice and be out there quite actively and be at the forefront of this societal movement that was taking place.
That's great, thank you. I love the idea of every third Friday off.
Oh, yes,
great.
I can attest. I'm a fan of that.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Matt, can we switch to question number 3, please? And I would like you, Anne, please, to lead us on this one with what are the leadership traits that count today?
Thanks, Vicki. Sharon actually trailed what I was going to say, which is if I was to name 3 leaders who've come out of the pandemic well, if anybody can come out of COVID-19 well, they would be Australia, Scotland and Germany. So Nicola Sturgeon, Jacinda Ardern and Angela Merkel. And if I was to look at them and say, what is it that's made them more effective leaders during this time? I'd say it's an ability to be humble. Again, referring back to what we've heard, an ability to say that they don't know everything. An apparent ability to listen to technical, medical expertise and admit that they're not experts, and then to say we're going to follow that expertise. An ability to take people with them. So transparency, inclusion, all of the things I think anytime make a man or a woman a good leader, regardless of gender, but actually have really come to their own as we are in these unprecedented times. And I was thinking, we've all done it, and get people to put hands in the air. How many times have you done a leadership style assessment? Hands in the air, panel. There you go. And we always use these words about influential and directional, and you name it, I've done all of them. One I was called 2 years ago and I got really upset at the time was I had a tendency to be a disruptive leader, and I was hugely offended. And it's a bit like that assertive aggressive thing that as a female leader you get. It's like, how very dare you say I'm this? I'm actually not. But I actually went and looked it up. And for those who want to Google it later, I'll give you a kind of clue. It's a Bill Gates. So what a disruptive leader does is handle uncertainty. So in these uncertain times, a disruptive leader isn't scared of uncertainty, but more importantly, they can work with their staff and their peers to minimize that uncertainty and that fear, which we're all going through at the moment, which is to say, I don't know everything, but here's what we're going to do to try and mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on you as an employee, as you as a human being, as you as a mother. And I don't have a 13-year-old, thank the Lord, mine are long gone. I do have a cat. So you may or may not see Jake, he's a media star. But weirdly, that human element has become a big part of being a leader during COVID. It's far more intimate for me to be sitting in my kitchen as a leader than it is for me to be actually standing in front of 78 of my staff saying, hello, I'm you and I'm your chief executive. They're actually seeing me as a human first and a leader second and a chief executive third, to be honest. And the other thing that disruptive leaders do is they actually turn that uncertainty into change. So all of us have impacts on our businesses at the moment, whether it's not-for-profit, which I am, whether you're a FTSE, whether you're a charity or a care organisation, we're all having to look at how we use our staff, how we use media, where our money's coming from, how we invest it, how we use it. And that kind of ability to handle disruption and to turn it into a positive thing and to take your staff with you, I think is what we're all really coming to terms with. And if actually, weirdly, Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever we're doing in a human setting helps us do that, then I think it's a good thing. On the downside of that, however, how do we turn what makes us effective leaders, men or women, into virtual leaders? Because my office is shut, I'm sure many of you are. I'm meeting a team that have never met me. How do I take the bits of me that are an effective leader in person, which is you can come and talk to me in the kitchen, you can talk to me on the way up the stairs. How do I make sure my introverts get to know me? Because the extroverts have invited me. I've done 5 meetings in Costa Coffee in St Albans. I've had all my directors at my kitchen table. We've had a picnic in a field. But that's the extroverts. That's the ones who've got the courage to come up to a new chief executive and say, I want you to know me. What do we do as leaders in these times to make sure that when you're actually sitting behind a screen, you still have the ability for introverts to reach out? And I couldn't agree more about the telephone. The telephone is underrated as a form of communication. I got mascara on today. That's the first in about 3 months, people. I'm not always going to be looking quite like this, and I really don't want to be sitting after a bad night's sleep, not at my best. So we should be very comfortable using the phone, using Zoom, using Teams, finding a way to reach out to everybody, not just the extroverts, and actually turning what makes us effective female leaders into something that I think during the pandemic can be even more powerful.
Thank you, Anne. And I thought it was interesting, your comments about the female political leaders. I read also that the female leaders still only govern about 7% of the world's population. So, and clearly there have been some great stories of female leaders in places like Germany, New Zealand, Taiwan. So clearly we need more of those women leading our countries. And just to note, I'm also wearing mascara today for the first time, I think, this week. So yes. Emma, would you agree with Anne's comments? Would you like to add anything to that?
I'll keep it brief because I spoke a little bit on this earlier on, but I would absolutely endorse Anne's comments, and I particularly liked the comment about human leadership and really giving people an insight into who you are as a person. I think that's incredibly powerful, and of course being human means showing that you don't get it right all the time and that you make mistakes, and actually that's okay. So I think one of the real strengths and will continue to be something that I hope grows over time will be leadership's ability to show where they have made mistakes and what they've learned from it, and what the organisation can do to make sure that mistake never ever happens again. And giving your teams permission to take risk and make mistakes is a really is a seismic shift actually for many organisations. But if you can do that and you can harness the power and put people in a safe environment where they take risks within a framework that is acceptable to the organisation, you get so much back. And yeah, so I really like that comment, Anne.
That's great. And
If I
certainly
can just quickly jump in, because I had a thought just come into my mind. It's also important in applying the same things to co-founders and partners and the board if you have, because I'm actually made this mistake as we went into COVID, and I really look after the employees, and I really put a lot of effort in thinking about partners and customers and employees, and I have assumed my co-founder will be responding to crisis in the same way, and it wasn't so, and they needed a similar level of support as everybody else. So it's about being inclusive and holistic in that approach and thinking about everybody who is part of the organization and all of the stakeholders that are involved in this.
That's great, thank you. I think we've all made some mistakes this year through some very unprecedented times. We'll have lots of learnings for sure. Okay, so if we go to question 4, Matt, and I love this question. We're at the end of 3 days of Great Business Breakfast, and we're at the 4th question. And what I love about this question is, you know, it's sort of looking to the positive. So following a year of tumultuous change in 2020, what are you most optimistic about as we look ahead to the future of work? And Zara, if I could ask you to continue with your thoughts to this question, please, but would welcome input from all the panelists.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question considering the poll at the beginning with everybody thinking that this is actually going to have quite a negative impact on women going forward. And it's really easy to start thinking that when you hear all the stats about impact on women. If you look at, for instance, the States, in September alone, of all of the people who have dropped out of the labor force, 80% were women. 80% of all of the people dropped out of the labor force in the States in September. So it really kind of stats like that can reinforce a lot of fear and a lot of preconceptions about what's going to happen to gender equality. You have articles talking about how this is going to knock over half a century of progress that we've made in the space of equality. But at the same time, I see it as a real opportunity for us to take things in our hands. And as Anne was saying earlier, the leaders that come to mind who have weathered this crisis with dignity and grace and better than anyone else have been the female leaders, and they've done that by being themselves, by being true, by being honest, and by staying true to their feelings of care and inclusivity and making sure that everybody's okay. So all of these qualities actually can ensure a lot of resilience and a lot of kind of alleviating other people's fears and making sure that everybody kind of feels more optimistic about things. One of the things that I've noticed in working with businesses over the past 6 months is that everybody's becoming a bit more open to experimenting and trying new things, because what they have known forever doesn't work anymore. So they're more open to trying new things. They're more open to new ideas. You have a lot of businesses like Unilever and other large companies starting to move away from the conversation of shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, which means you get more involved with all of the stakeholders and all of the beneficiaries of the business. We have the green agenda really picking up. We have the Black Lives Matter movement really pushing into issues that we should have sorted years ago. So it's a real opportunity. And when looking back at that poll, I think the thing that I think about is that it's really up to us. It's up to everybody in this session today to think about how can I make things happen that will be better for me as a woman. And it's important to think selfishly sometimes, because men do, and also for everybody else, because that actually is what makes us different from men, is we think about everybody else. And if from my point of view, I'm optimistic. I mean, we all have to be optimistic. We're in business, we're entrepreneurs. If you're not optimistic, we shouldn't really be doing this. But it is an opportunity because everybody's more open to experimenting, and this is a time to step up and really put this agenda forward.
That's great. Would anybody else like to comment? Who would like to take that? Sharon?
Yeah, I think building on what Zara was saying about being able to experiment, especially in the charity sector, obviously incomes are down catastrophically, but it gives us the opportunity, a once in a lifetime opportunity, really to revisit what we're doing, why we're doing it, and concentrate on what we should be doing. It may not apply to all businesses, but I think just actually having that feeling in an organisation that you can ask these questions: why are we doing that? Why don't we stop this? Have we thought of doing that? And assessing where we fit in society and what we should be doing and what our impacts are. Obviously, I represent the Church of England, which has a certain demographic, or is perceived to have a certain demographic. How can we, you know, all the digital services and digital mission that's been going on, how can we reinvent ourselves to make ourselves a lot more relevant? So I think it's probably the kick some businesses need. Slightly negatively, it may also be where people have got really good ideas, but they're not going to fly commercially. It may put some people off, but I think the opportunity for change is a one in a lifetime opportunity we're not going to have again.
That's great, thank you.
Just a short add-on to that, a bit of a plug as well, I suppose. If you think about it from the perspective of people who have a disability, this changed way of working for some has been absolutely transformational. So part of what we do is to support people to get back into work, or into work for the first time, whether that's on a volunteering basis or paid employment. And being able to do that virtually has opened up so many opportunities for the people that we support. There's lots that I could say about the opportunities also for our central teams who are experiencing, you know, flexible working, moving to Yorkshire, moving to the South Coast. They're off everywhere because we've said they never need to come back into the office ever again. So yeah, there's lots I could say there, but actually I think there's a whole segment of society that potentially has a huge amount to gain from the future of work and the changes that we're experiencing now.
That's great, thank you. Holly?
Sorry, there you go.
Yeah, really great comments preceding mine. I think one thing that I'm optimistic about is just the ability for people to connect on a more deeply and on an emotional level in a virtual environment, right? So I think, you know, in some instances in an office environment, it is difficult to drive a personal connection because things are moving quickly. If there's a hierarchy, it's prevalent in the office. And I think that the virtual environment has really established a sense of egalitarianism. So we talked about it here. You know, there's nowhere to hide virtually. You know, the background is there, the children are there, the dog is there, the doorbell's ringing. So it does bring a much more human aspect to how you're interacting with your employees and staff. And what I have experienced is that I've become even closer to my peers and my teams. In a way that I probably wouldn't have broken through in a more traditional environment. So I'm optimistic that maybe that will continue across organizations, and hopefully people will feel connected even though there is a screen as a barrier, so to speak.
That's great, thank you. Anne, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Quick one, and a completely selfish one, is as a membership organisation. So we've seen between 1,000 and 1,200 new members a month in the last 4 months.
Wow.
And that's people stuck at home thinking, I had this mad idea and I've never had the time, and now I'm going to try it. So they are literally starting up their own businesses from their home, and they need to sell it through a retailer or on a marketplace, and they come to us to kind of set themselves up, and off they go. And, you know, it's the range of ideas from apparel to goat cheese to, you know, different ways in which people are using products that they've got. So it kind of follows on from that green agenda. It follows on from that entrepreneurial thing. And some of those businesses will fail. We know that, you know, probably more than 50% will fail. But if we kind of take that on a macro level across not just the UK, but globally, that's an awful lot of budding entrepreneurs. And that's one of the things that kind of makes me optimistic about when we come out the other side. Some of these people would never have taken the time to do that if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic.
Absolutely, that's great, thank you. So that's the end of our 4 questions, but Matt, can I turn over to you for our Q&A session, please?
Absolutely, Vicky. Yes, so we've got a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is, and I think this might refer to something Anne mentioned earlier. What advice would you suggest to ensure that new employees are included and feel included when they are hired virtually?
Somebody who is a new employee, not just doing it virtually, and this sounds ridiculous when we're in the middle of COVID-19, but if I hadn't actually been able to see some of my staff, my chair, my peers, I would have gone slowly insane. So there's lots you can do. So pragmatically, I was sent a care pack before I joined. So literally, welcome to the company pack with a mug, some tea. We're about to do a winter pack to not just new staff, but existing staff, which is here's some mulled wine, here's an non-alcoholic version. The induction actually works quite well, very practically. Dissemination of information to a new employee works really well. What doesn't work is when you get into doing the day job. It doesn't matter how much your culture club does, or 4 o'clock drinks, or let's do a quiz. As a new employee, you've got to find that blend of Teams and face-to-face in a COVID-friendly environment. Otherwise, I think it could be very, very isolating, stuck at home permanently. And that's only partly optimistic. I'm sorry to whoever asked that question.
No,
Thanks,
that's
Anne.
great.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
really difficult one. We've employed a few people over the summer, and I met one of them a couple of weeks ago for the first time, face to face. And sometimes it can't work out that you see them often, because it is also a time when we can employ people who are anywhere. And this one person who I met recently, he has finished his studies at Bristol Uni, but has moved back to Devon to live with his parents. So it's not really easy to organize face-to-face meetings when everybody has dispersed around and is not necessarily in the same space as you. And I don't know if you've seen, but Barbados is giving out visas for people who want to make that their home for working. So it can become increasingly difficult to meet people face-to-face. But I agree with Anne that it's important to establish and set that rapport with employees and actually meet them and get to know them. And really go out of your way to make sure that they feel included. It's a challenging time also for what is now becoming known as blended working, when some employees are at home working from home and others are coming into the office, and that we see can sometimes lead to gaps as well, depending on who's in the office can become in charge of a project, can become in charge of a P&L, and so making sure that all those things are thought through is really paramount.
Yeah, there's definitely a challenge, isn't there, sometimes, that people that continue to work remotely and those in the office can sometimes feel slightly separated, or perhaps experience different things.
I think it would be interesting if companies retrospectively, if they're assessing the retention rate during COVID, for new employees who ramped, how many of them have retained and have they made it through this hump? I mean, we're experiencing it too. It's really a challenge to onboard in this environment, and even for very senior leaders who are trying to bond with the team, and then to people who are trying to execute and things have shifted so dramatically in how we previously executed in marketing and communications, and to try to on-ramp and change a delivery style of an event or a program or a campaign. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think I'd just come in as well, especially for new people in the organisation, to make them aware of what support is available to them. So, if there's no employee helpline or something, because they may not have that connection that they can talk to somebody in the business. But I find it really useful to be able to offer there's a listening service. And we're actually looking at taking on a new chaplain as well. So we've got somebody that people can actually turn to who is not part of the organisation, but is there just as a listening ear.
Great.
Interesting, Vicky. And a question that probably follows on from this theme is, how do you look for issues with well-being when you're virtual? I don't know if anybody wants to pick that one up.
I think one of the key things is to create places and spaces for people to be able to talk about their issues. So it's about encouraging teams to have coffee mornings around certain topics to have conversations, but also I've seen a lot of companies kind of provide specifically space and buy-in memberships for people to do yoga or for people to do meditation or things like that they can do to keep in with well-being. And another thing that we find is important is just learning more and more about your employees. Like I said before, the question about, do your employees have caring responsibilities? Are they okay managing those caring responsibilities? Do they need additional support? What does flexible working mean for you as an organization? And really embodying a lot of those issues yourself as a leader, I think, is important, because sometimes you see organizations where this becomes a tick box exercise, and there's some policies somewhere talking about well-being and talking about different kind of benefits for employees that just sit on a shelf, but unless they're actually actively communicated and actively brought out in the open and actively lived by the leadership team, there's always going to be kind of not the right uptake for them.
I mean, I think, as Anne said, you tend to find out the noisy ones first, and it's really a case of how do you find the quiet ones, and it's working with your team leaders or your managers to find the best approach to make sure everybody's spoken to somebody. And obviously there's a range of how people like to interact, and sort of very aware of, having come from a software background, people on the spectrum do not necessarily want to be interacted with in a group. They might actually be happy with just a little chat message. So I think some of it is understanding each individual and knowing it's not one size fits all, but the other side is being very systematic to make sure that everybody has been contacted, once a week, once a fortnight, just to make sure they're okay. And I think it was Zara was saying about co-founders, the people who are on the same level as you, or even your one-ups, make sure you check in on them too. I've got a guy that reports into me who is lovely, and he always checks in on me on a Friday, and I really, really appreciate it, because otherwise being at the top is quite lonely. So I think just be sensitive to how people like to be interacted with, and don't assume just because they're not on their staff coffee morning that they're okay. Just find a better way to get in touch with them.
Yeah, one of the most effective things I think that we did through the summer period was get a whole bank of volunteers to do welfare calls. So we have 360 services around in England and Wales, and you can't really get a feel for what's going on there in terms of morale. You can watch all the quality indicators and so on, but the welfare calls were really appreciated, and we just did them on a fortnightly basis. But the unexpected benefit of them was that it massively increased the networking of the organisation. So we had a lot of people from our central functions, in finance or IT or whatever, who were part of that team, and it made them really, really connected with what we do as an organisation, and they've made some friendships, I think, which will sustain for a really long time.
It's that secret power of that telephone again. Just picking up the phone. Matt, do we have any other questions?
Certainly, yeah, there's one more here. If there's one defining moment in your career, what is it and why? It's not aimed at anyone in particular. Does anybody want to take that one first?
I'll have a go. I mean, I think coming from a technology background, technology's always been changing, and when I do careers talks, I always say, the job my previous job wasn't invented when I graduated, and when I graduated, the job I went into then, which involved printing the phone book, doesn't exist now. So I feel like I've been through a number of technologically driven changes, but without doubt, my move to the third sector and to the Church of England this year has been one of the biggest changes I've ever made. And I think, had I not had a bit of time to think about what it was I wanted to do with my career, I'd probably still be in the tech sector and consulting. So it's been a change. Ask me next year if it was the right one, but I'm really enjoying it now. But I think just be brave, and I've always said, why not? It's a bit like, why do you climb Everest? Because it's there. Take the risk once in a while.
Brilliant. Anyone else?
I can. I think for me, I will dig back through the years, but when I first graduated from university, I had my very first job, and this was, decades ago, unfortunately, but I worked for a vice president of a bank as her PA, and I joined as a PA, and she, in retrospect, she had such a huge influence on my career. And I think, it was career defining at the sort of embryonic stages for me. And I think that just, it sends the message to women, no matter what level that you are within the organization, you can influence and you can really evolve and shape somebody's perspective on their career at a very young age. So this woman was very instrumental, but it isn't even till I had, a few years later to look back, and my mother pointed it out to me to tell me how influential this woman was in shaping how I approached my career. And I think, again, just the more counsel and connection that you can offer to other females in the workplace is something that really is so helpful and empowering for women.
Thank you, Holly. Matt, do we have time for one more panelist to respond?
Yes, absolutely. If one more person wants to respond to that. I think Anne.
Yeah, I think, following on what Holly was saying, I think what I found is I had a female boss in my early career who really trusted me. Just the second day she met me, she just blindingly trusted me to lead on a project and just put it in my hands and just said, go with it. And that whole trust that she had in me just made me work above and beyond, because I felt like I have to meet that trust. So I think one key thing for me was that someone trusted me. So that's what I try to do in turn with a lot of our employees, and just trust them that they will do things right. And if they need me, they will come back.
Thanks, Zara. Anne, I think you wanted to say something too.
A quick one, actually, and it's the importance of remembering that the other half of the population can also be mentors, which is my first kick. My first defining moment was a male boss told me I was lazy, and he wasn't wrong, that I just was doing as little as possible to get as big a bonus as possible, and he wasn't wrong, and to either start working or he'd fire me. And he then promoted me. And what I discovered at 25 was that career was what I wanted, whereas I'd been treating it as if it was a job. And if it wasn't for this particular individual, I would probably still be doing a succession of jobs, because I had no ambition whatsoever. I didn't realize that as kind of working class Glasgow female, you could actually have ambitions beyond the next job. And it took a very stroppy Welshman to give me that kick. And I've been forever grateful. But I also believe in giving it back. So I have also not just done the mentoring, but I have occasionally given a female that I've been mentoring the kick, which is, you've got to believe in yourself, because if you don't, who will?
That's great. What a positive note to end the discussion on. So thank you very much. So I wanted to take the chance to thank you, ladies, for your wonderful stories, your great insights. I've personally found it really fascinating, and I'm sure that our audience has as well. So really, really appreciate you being available and giving up your valuable time today. Thank you again as well to our audience for dialing in early this morning. We really hope that you've also enjoyed it. Once again, that will be, it's been recorded and will be available on our website later today. So we really hope that you have found it useful. And I will walk away with that, the words just said about staying true to ourselves. So I wish you success, particularly in those roles that have been very new this year, and obviously in all your other positions. But thank you once again, panelists, for your time and your inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.